gouvernement par rapport à la durabilité, la viabilité des infrastructures. Welcome everybody, good morning ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this panel on sustainable infrastructure from the point of view of various levels of government. I'm going to indicate to you what the format is for this panel. I will have very brief introductions of the three panelists. We will have the three brief presentations from each of us. And then after that, we'll have a small panel discussions. Then we'll open it to the audience to ask questions to either the group or each of the presenters particularly. I am told that the CFO of the City of Edmonton or the Assistant Deputy Manager, Alberta Treasury Board, both have forgotten to take their checkbooks with them, so please do not ask for money at this time. And I am not eligible to ask for money anyways, not being from Alberta. I will put the presentation. And I'll do my introductions. My name is Felio. I am a civil engineer, but here I am as a municipal councillor for a small municipality that is in Eastern Ontario. My background is infrastructure management, and I've been working in the field for a number of years now in various functions, including working at the federal government level, trying to put control over the expenditures of these famous or infamous programs like MRIF and CSCE and all those good acronyms that we have. So that will be as much as I will say about my background. To my immediate right, we have Lorna Rosen, who is the Chief Financial Officer and Treasurer for the City of Edmonton. And she oversees all the finance functions at the city, as well as the assessment and taxation function, coordinates the city's strategic planning and corporate performance measurement. She is a member of the city's corporate leadership team. She joined the city in 2008, first as a general manager of asset management and public works, moving to the role of CFO in 2010. Prior to joining the City of Edmonton, Lorna was the city manager of the city of Fort Saskatchewan. She started her career in the public service about 20 plus years ago in the education sector, serving as internal auditor for the Edmonton Public Schools and associate superintendent of operations for St. Albert Protestant Schools, and prior to moving to the municipal sector in 2000. Lorna is a certified management accountant. Welcome, Lorna. The second speaker to Lorna's right is Neill McKay, Assistant Deputy Manager, Alberta Treasury Board and Enterprise. He is responsible for Alternative Capital Financing Office, which works on public-private partnerships. He's also responsible for the division that leads the government's capital planning process and for the air transportation service, which provides air travel services to government departments, boards, and agencies. Prior to joining Treasury Board and Enterprise, Neill was in Alberta Transportation and spent 17 years as a consultant. He led the procurement process for 3 ring roads P3 projects in Edmonton and Calgary. Surprised we didn't cross paths at that time when I was at Infrastructure Canada, but and Neill is also a civil engineer, and we won't hold it against him that he graduated from the University of Waterloo. I don't know if Ralph is here, but so please help me welcome Lorna and Neill. I will start my presentation introducing where I come from. And this is being a panel, I guess that my presentation is made more to generate discussion as opposed to provide you with technical insight about what we do. The city of Clarence, Rockland, Ottawa is to our west, and Parliament Hill is about 30 kilometers from downtown Rockland to downtown Ottawa. To the east, we have the city of Montreal, 170 kilometers away. We have a territory of about 300 square kilometers. We have 23,000 people. And as many municipalities that are small beside a giant city, then we have the problems of a large city with the resources of a small city. And I have to make a plug, by the way, we don't have an engineer on staff, but we are hiring now. So if anybody knows a civil engineer that wants to join our wonderful city, please come and see me after the presentation. You know, we have our challenges at the city. For example, yesterday I was talking to a number of people, and 90% of our revenues come from residential taxes. And that doesn't give us much flexibility in terms of what we do, because every time that we do something, it hits directly the residential tax. So we have to be very careful. We have, as I said, the expectations from our citizens, from the levels of service. They are near Ottawa. Ottawa is 1 million people. We are 23,000. People that live in Clarence Rockland expect to have exactly the same level of service that you have in Ottawa. But they move to Clarence Rockland because our taxes are less. So we have these expectations from you know, what the people want in terms of level of service, but they don't want to pay for it. When we talk about infrastructure, and this is extracted from just the City of Hamilton State of the Infrastructure Report, and you know, we saw a wonderful video about the City of Edmonton, infrastructure and buildings and so on this morning at the opening session. You look at that, and then I take a step back and say, well, we don't have, you know, that, and we don't have that, but we have it in a smaller scale. We have it, you know, instead of having 2,000 kilometers or 4,000 kilometers of roads, we have 250 kilometers of roads. But we still have to maintain them at the same level of service that other people want to. So we have all these things that you see on the slide in terms of infrastructure that we have to manage, but with limited resources, not only material, but also financial and human. You know, we are stuck getting poor quality granular material for our roads because there's none available in an area. So don't expect our roads to last 25 years. If we can make them last 15 years, we'll be very happy. So, you know, this is what some people think when they're looking at green infrastructure, and please don't, you know, consider that. This is right in front of my house. So I've got nice grass growing into the cracks, and crack sealant has been done about 20 years ago on this. You know, don't consider that traffic calming devices, please. Okay, you guys as engineers, you know, you maintain the roads and you do the design and so on. Those are real examples of where I live. This is probably where the civil engineers have created job opportunities for the information technology people, because by the time that we created these chaos on our roads, the IT people were devising all these beautiful mobile devices that we're using. And you know, are those really traffic calming devices or not? And I had a request already from somebody to buy one of those and put it in the parking spots where they like to park, so that nobody parks there and they remove it. And you know, we have to realize, when I look at all these slides, and I said, what's the level of service associated with that? Because at the end of the day, I'm sitting with 8 other members of council, and the questions that are coming out relate to levels of service. They don't relate to the technical issues, although we have residents that know more about the technical issues than our staff, and that happens in every city. You have, you know, people that know a lot. But at the end of the day, they want to know about, you know, level of service. And you know, roads are easy to see, and people you know, can complain about it, you know, about it very, very easily, because they know there's a pothole there. They'll call the city, and if the city doesn't respond, then they'll talk to the councilor. On the water side, we seem to be doing better as municipalities in general, and in general because we're much more regulated from the water side than we are for the roads. And we had, events like Walkerton that in many provinces made the provincial governments to go through a number of regulations. But are we really doing that well in terms of the water side? This is taken from here, one of the EPCOR water main breaks not too long ago, and this is just recent in Montreal. The idea here is that this is what we report, what newspapers report, what people see in the newspapers, what we 99% of the cases, this is what we have. We have still good quality water going through. People open their tap and they drink their water, and very, very few people get sick. So this is what we have to deal with. And from a municipal side, council side, we are faced with competing priorities and competing pressures, and we always have to make decisions. At the end of the day, the council is a decision-making body, and those are examples of the things that we have to deal with. We have to make decisions between growth and existing, or find the balance between those. And the growth and the developers are saying, well, you build more, you'll have more taxes, and you have more taxes, you'll be able to pay for all the rest of the infrastructure that you need to pay for. And then you have the other side. We say, hey, we've been paying taxes for 20 years, and you always promised that the road was going to be fixed, and you never fixed it. And so how do you balance the existing versus growth? This is one of the dilemmas. This is a curve, and I apologize, it's in French, but this is the projections for a project, a 15,000 people growth area in our city. This corresponds to about 5,000 new units. And what you see in the red line here, those are our revenues. This is tax revenues coming from that development. What you see in the blue line here is our current practice, operation, and maintenance costs. So even if we don't do a good job at maintaining and operating our roads, we know that our costs are going to be even higher than what we're going to get into revenues. And then the black line here is operation and maintenance costs plus building up a reserve to be able to replace eventually all that new infrastructure. And so what you end up with is here, this is what your infrastructure deficit and deferred maintenance. And what I find interesting, particularly as a city councilor, is that I look at when we start really seeing that deficit occurring. And that deficit is only visible after 3 or 4 years of the development taking place. So if I look at my term is 4 years. So if in the first year of my term I approve this new development taking place, it's going to be beautiful, and I'm going to look good for 4 years before the end of my term. And then, since I know that that's going to happen, I better get out of council, because the new council is going to have to deal with that. Okay, so what is happening here? How come we don't see that? We don't see it because every city has some kind of capacity to be able to absorb additional work. We can pay employees some extra, overtime hours, and we can rent, extend a little bit our routes for winter maintenance and so on. We can do that. But after 3 or 4 years or 5 years, what happens is that now we have to hire a new employee, we have to buy a new truck, we have to buy more, et cetera, et cetera. And now you start seeing really that we have this differential. And so if you don't take this long-term view, this was a true life cycle costing analysis that we did over the lifetime of the infrastructure, we only reported it over 20 years. Why? Because people have a difficulty in looking at what's going to happen in 50 years and 60 years and so on, and they start questioning a lot your assumptions. But the other thing is that we have official plans that are for 20 years. So we can match our development with our official plans. Again, the decisions about capital and operations. let's build new because, we need these new things. And a lot of discussions is, let's borrow for 20 years to build our new roads. Well, our roads don't last 15 years, so why would you borrow for 20 years? And operations and maintenance, this is a balance. It's easy to cut the operations and maintenance budget. We also have a number of decisions to be made regarding other services. And infrastructure has to compete with protection, fire protection, police protection, social services, recreational facilities. All that is part of the decision-making process. And so at one point, comes budget time. You have all these pressures coming up, and you have to make decisions. And the decisions are made based on the best business cases that can be provided. I can tell you that, fire trucks, our fire services are really good at making a good business case about their system. We've been arguing whether they needed a flat nose, pumper versus a crew cab pumper. And the fire chief wants a flat nose, because that's the T-boat type thing, and he doesn't want to have a commercial crew cab. And so we've been having these discussions at council, and guess what he did? Next council meeting, half an hour before, he invited all of council to come and sit down in two different types of trucks, one which was a flat nose, one which was a crew cab, and then show us, that the crew cab is not comfortable. And he asked some of the councilors to put the big equipment and see how cramped they are. And he said, well, you don't want your firefighters to be all cramped like that. Well, they made a very good business case. How do you take a piece of sewer and bring it to council and say, hey, we really need to fix that? We saw that slide before, and sometimes there are bad decisions that are made. And this is, although this is an engineer's dream because it lasts forever, it has infinite capacity to meet demand, but it doesn't have any function whatsoever. And, really, is it that complicated? And I submit to you there is not. I think that a lot of things is just common sense. And, that's kind of the view of a councilor. Just manage the public assets the same way that you manage your private assets. And we have a tendency to forget about that. So I'll conclude here, and I'm not going to take any questions, but we'll look at it now from a more serious CFO finance side, and then we'll go on for the discussion later. Thank you.
An opposite view, and it's not just because Guy is a counselor and because that's my orientation. It's because for the city of Edmonton, I actually do believe that it is complicated and that it is complex. And so in approaching this topic, I wanted to give you a little bit of an understanding of the city of Edmonton situation. I wanted to talk a little bit about the number of competing factors that go into creating the environment within which infrastructure decisions are actually made. And while the context that I'm going to share with you is an Edmonton context, all municipalities have complexities, the small ones and the large ones, that absolutely need to be considered in determining how public infrastructure decisions are actually made. Because if you don't actually understand your environment well, and if you don't actually understand the factors, then it becomes really hard to obtain a sustainable solution. And sustainability, to me, is about the long term. And whenever you're looking at the long term as opposed to the short term, you're talking about, then again, added complexity. So this is a little bit not just about Edmonton. This is about Alberta. And so for those of you who are familiar with Alberta's economy, it's what's commonly referred to as a boom and bust. And so for the past 100 years, Edmonton has experienced significant changes. Boom and bust cycles, environmental issues, funding issues, land use planning, changes in urban design. And so what you see here in terms of this chart, it actually depicts Edmonton's growth as demonstrated hopefully in a method that you can understand. It's related to the length of sewer constructed per year. And so given that I'm sure that there is some way to actually demonstrate for Guy's Council the necessity of sewer system, maybe you could have them all go to the washroom at the same time and have that not work. We actually felt that the length of the sewer system is a very good indicator of growth and construction, because it's the asset that really needs to go in first. And so the first boom, you can see very little boom here, was actually after the First World War. And then we really didn't see what I'm going to call significant increases until after the Second World War. And then this is probably what Alberta's most famous for, is the boom that occurred in the 70s. And that actually saw significant development in the city. And then what happened to everybody was the 80s hit. And just on a little personal note, my husband is actually a plumbing contractor. He's a tradesperson, and we've lived here all our lives. And so he was a tradesperson in Alberta in the 80s, and so he has quite a unique perspective of the bust piece of this cycle, you know, the downturn, where you couldn't actually get a job in Alberta in the trades in the 80s. And there were extremely high interest rates in the 80s as well, hovering around even as high as 20%. So what that actually did for us was it made us reluctant to borrow money, because the city had been locked into some borrowing that was not really perhaps fiscally sound. And so they came up with a debt management policy. It's sort of where you actually run into a situation where you have a really bad reaction and you maybe go too far the other way. And so Edmonton became debt-free, with the exception of some self-liquidating debt related to the utilities. And all city expenditures at that time had to be pay-as-you-go, and no borrowing was allowed. And even after we got out of the 80s and started to see a little bit of progress in the 1990s, there was an extreme reluctance on behalf of council, because there was a couple of long-serving council members with really long memories about the high interest rates, to actually continue to borrow. And so we saw an infrastructure deficit from two perspectives, because we didn't actually have the fiscal capacity to just pay for things, because these kinds of projects tend to be very high cost, and as well, we didn't have what I would call then the willingness on behalf of council to continue to invest in new growth infrastructure going forward. And so what we came to here, though, was an understanding of the importance to address infrastructure needs over the long term. And when you start to take a long-term perspective, you start to get a different attitude towards borrowing. If you actually understand that the infrastructure that you pay for today and that you put in today is not just going to serve the taxpayers of today, it's going to serve the taxpayers of tomorrow, and in the case of sewer infrastructure, it's going to serve the taxpayers 50 years down the road. And then it becomes actually an equity exercise. It becomes an exercise in matching the expenses for that infrastructure to the people who are actually utilizing them. And so we really started to on a program of rebuilding in, and I'd say the early 2000s in Edmonton. So just to give you a little bit of sense of what our infrastructure is made up of, not surprisingly to, I'm sure, this room, our two biggest pieces of infrastructure are our drainage infrastructure and our roads. So Edmonton's assets at the end of 2010 had a replacement value of approximately $35.7 billion. And so that translates into a per capita value of over $44,000 for every person in Edmonton, which is quite significant investment. And because we have a wide range of responsibilities, and this goes to maybe a little bit of Guy's comments as well about how easy it is for the fire services to make arguments for that, because they they tug on heartstrings as well as other things. Because we provide a wide range of service, there are absolutely competing priorities. But when you're actually looking at this from strictly, in particular, an infrastructure maintenance perspective, it's pretty hard to ignore that this is where our investment is, and that it would be really remiss of us as public stewards to not take care of this big investment. But in addition, of course, we have all of this other investment that includes, of course, things like buildings and even helicopters and tunnel boring machines and red light cameras. Like, we have a tremendous variety of infrastructure. So we just presented a 3-year capital plan. We do a 10-year capital investment agenda, and we do a 3-year capital plan for approval to council, which we presented the 2012 to 14 capital plan to council for approval in December. To give you a little bit of a sense of the current council's orientation to improving infrastructure and also to moving forward on growth and transformational projects, we took in a $2.3 billion 3-year capital plan, and by the time we were finished with council, it was a $2.8 billion capital plan, and they had actually approved some borrowing that we had not contemplated or recommended in order to move their agenda forward. So we actually have a very proactive council with respect to infrastructure issues. In the plan that we took forward to them, we had identified needs, and out of the what we actually recommended for approval based on our actual sources of funding was 56% was funded and 44% was not funded. So we still had identified to council that we had over $2 billion worth of needs that we weren't able to fund. And part of that is because we do have limited sources of funding. Even though this pie is broken into a number of different slices, it's really important to understand that a number of these slices actually come from the same place, which is property taxes. So tax-supported debt, which here in this pie is 23%. General financing, that's just basically pay-as-you-go. That's money that we take from the tax base and just spend every year on capital. And neighborhood renewal, which I'm going to talk a little bit about. So it's just maybe coincidental that the total of those three categories is 42%, and that the money that we get from other orders of government amounts to 42% of our capital program as well. And so one of the things that I'm cognizant of every day is that we're very fortunate here in Edmonton that we are in Alberta, and that we have a provincial government that recognizes the contribution that cities make to the growth and the sustainability of the economy in Alberta. And so the province of Alberta actually provides us with significant grant funding on an ongoing basis. And in addition, the federal government gives us fuel tax money, which helped us, quite frankly, to expand our LRT system. So all good things. That to me is well, we're going to talk a little bit about integration within an order of government and within the municipality of Edmonton in particular. I think that it's also important to have that integration where possible between the three orders of government and understand the contributions that are made. Because we have such a significant asset base, it's really important that we take the right approach when we say we have limited resources, and if we're going to look at just the renewal side of the equation, maintaining that infrastructure, how do we actually approach that? What's the best way for us to move forward? So we use a risk-based management approach. So we calculate the renewal needs for all of the assets within the corporation, and we put them on an even footing with respect to risk exposure. So we go through a number of technical exercises to actually do that. It's a very comprehensive database, but what it allows us to do is it allows us to determine what the annual reinvestment in our infrastructure needs to be given predetermined physical condition levels and risk tolerance. And so say, for example, we would have a much lower risk tolerance on a bridge than we might have on a parks building. So we do look at those things, and then given the budget that we have, we talk about what can we afford to do within that budget. So for the current asset base that the city has, to keep just from a physical condition perspective, our ratings in those fair to good perspective, we need an investment ongoing for at least the next 10 to 20 years of almost $500 million a year is what we've determined. And what we haven't put into the mix yet, but are working hard to put into the mix, is the functionality piece. Because you can have in particular, you can have some of your infrastructure, buildings or other types of infrastructure, where they may still be in fair physical condition, but their functionality doesn't actually support the programs that you're trying to deliver. So in terms of the actual approach and the methodology, it was developed jointly by the City of Edmonton and the University of Alberta, and it uses probability and impacts of failure to determine risk level. It's actually a fairly sophisticated model that would not work at all if we didn't have the cooperation of the operational departments who, in the phraseology that we use in Edmonton, actually own the infrastructure. So it may surprise some of you, maybe not some of you, to know that despite the fact that I'm an accountant and I'm in charge of the financial services for the City of Edmonton, I employ architects and engineers, and I'm responsible with that team for helping the city determine what is the right approach to actually sustaining our infrastructure going forward. And so I understand that we cannot do that without the cooperation and contribution of all of the owners of the infrastructure throughout the city. So it's a real joint effort, and it actually, I believe, is a little bit complex, because we have asset inventory that we have to take into consideration, asset condition standards. We have to look at what's the risk tolerance for the corporation. And so engineers might have one level of risk tolerance, and councillors, Guy, may have another level of risk tolerance. What's the impact if an asset were actually to fail? What are the replacement and renewal costs? And we put that all together into what we like to call an optimization engineer. I think that's an engineering terminology. I don't think an accountant would actually call it that. And what that does for us is it tells us what our priorities should be over the next 20-year period of time, and then that helps us to sort through at least the renewal side of the equation. So when we looked at this methodology, which we've applied numerous times over the last few years, it's helped us then in determining our short and long-term renewal needs for the 3-year capital budget that we just approved, plus the 10-year capital investment agenda. And because we do get a significant amount of money from the province, we get an allocation over a 20-year period, maybe a little less than 20-year period, of $2 billion from the Municipal Sustainability Initiative funding from the province. It allows us then to optimize the use of those funds and to determine what's the best place to actually utilize those funds. The next step that we look to is how do we actually measure and improve the functionality and capacity of existing infrastructure. So it's about not just repairing, but when do we need to add those next 2 lanes to that arterial road, and the question that always comes to me, and who should actually pay for that, us or the developer? I realize that at the end of the day we're going to pay, but sometimes it helps if they contribute. So because this is complicated and because we're a large city, but even in a smaller city, you have competing priorities. The way that we've approached it in the City of Edmonton is we've got a strategic plan. Council has actually developed a plan called The Way Ahead, which sets out their long-range vision. And what we've tried to do with that through the creation of 6 10-year strategic goals, and around each goal we have a plan that matches those goals. And so if I can give you an example of those goals, it would be shifting Edmonton's transportation mode, which is supported by the Way We Move, which is our transportation master plan, or transforming Edmonton's urban form, which is, of course, the Way We Grow, and that's about our municipal development plan. So it really is helpful when you're taking those things to council, where you're asking them to make those tough decisions, if they've already done some looking ahead, and if they already know what it is that they're aspiring to be and where they want to go. In terms of the integration then, what we try and do is ensure that across the board we have consistency of assumptions and that we understand what it is that we're talking about so that everything is presented equitably. And one could actually say with respect to the example that Guy gave is that the comfort of a fire person in a fire truck is perhaps not in line with some of the key assumptions that should actually be used in determining where your infrastructure investments should be. And so we have sort of agreement across the board that we're not going to try and tug on heartstrings, that we are going to use the way ahead, and that we are going to the best of our ability, have some equity in comparison about infrastructure and infrastructure needs. So we look at all of the things that impact that. Alberta's economy, the economic conditions that impact revenue resource availability. We look at financial sustainability from a debt limit perspective, from a net financial asset perspective, from a financial sustainability index perspective. And that's a measure that we have that actually says how fast are we growing, how fast is inflation going up, and are we being efficient? Are we actually outstripping growth in terms of our costs? And if we are, is there a reason? We include in this modeling the spatial distribution potential for the City of Edmonton. So this is a picture of what we currently look like with the darker green being the higher density areas in the City of Edmonton. And this is as of 2010. And based on those various planning scenarios that I just talked to you about, we also then have, this is what we think we're going to look like in 2044. And if you just take the one little neighborhood that we have at the bottom there, and we look at what the population is now, what we expect it to be in 2044, what the employment is, because part of the reason that we make decisions is because we are an employment center in the region and in Alberta, and what the assessment is, and why the assessment is important, of course, to me, and the other hat that I wear is because that's the basis on which I get to collect taxes. So this gives us then a better picture going out with respect to what are the actual impacts of the infrastructure requirements of growth, and how do we sort through those to make decisions. And so when we are looking, one of those plans, one of those 6 goals that I talked about is actually long-term financial sustainability for the City of Edmonton. And the plan that we're working on currently is called The Way We Finance. And it's about how we actually integrate resource planning between what are our objectives, what kind of city are we trying to be, what is the basic day-to-day operational needs, and how do we not lose sight of the long term? How do we not present to council that 4-year snapshot that Guy talked about, ignoring where that gap widens, and have them understand the longer-term impacts of the decisions that they're making. And it's not from a negative perspective. It's not to try and convince them not to do something. It's so that they actually understand what it takes to be prepared to live with the decisions that they've actually made. And so the culmination of The Way We Finance is going to be a long-range financial planning model that we actually have a prototype for right now in an Excel base, and Council gave us some funding to actually turn this into a real interactive software application. And what it will allow us to do is to change all these different levers so that we can actually talk about if in a period of time we know, say for example, that our sewer infrastructure has hit that magic mark where our infrastructure is in total achieved half of its useful life. Like our average sewer infrastructure, the age is about 36 years. And so we're getting to a point where we know we have to spend more and more money on sewer infrastructure. And so if we pull that lever, if we actually say, okay, we're going to have to spend more money here, this is the ripple effect. And these are the different things that you can do to actually address that ripple effect. And what we hope to be able to do with this is have a consistency of assumptions and drivers across the organization, that we can do growth-based modeling. And it's not because we don't want to grow. It's because we need to know how to handle that growth. we're in the game. Like, there's no question, but we're in the game and we're encouraging growth, but we want to encourage smart growth. We want to be as efficient as possible in terms of the infrastructure that supports that growth. We need to do a better job of integrating our capital and operating budgets and implications so that we don't give our counselors the surprise that Guy has been getting as a counselor in terms of not really understanding when you approve the capital funding for this recreation center today, what are going to be the operating impacts the day it opens and what are going to be the operating impacts 10 years or 20 years down the road. And then we have to just, because I do have to put my accountant hat back on every once in a while, we have to couch those in terms of what is our debt capacity? What can we afford to borrow? How productive is it to use more resources now and less resources later on? So we pull all of those levers, and hopefully what comes out at the end of the day is a good path forward, at least some options for decision-making for council that makes sense to them. So what we really believe is that all Canadian municipalities, and we're just one of them, are faced with the challenge of sustaining infrastructure, and that it really requires an integrated approach where you link the city's vision, the corporate goals, with the infrastructure development management and long-term financial planning. Because the one thing about finance is that, well, it may be a pain, and us accountants can be a pain once in a while, I know that. You can't do anything without it. You can't actually do anything without the resources, and so it's about a combination of skill sets and an integration across the board and moving forward from there. So thank you very much for letting me share.
Thank you, Lorna.
And I'll just invite Neill now to.
Well, Guy, I just have a couple comments on what the two previous speakers have said. When Guy started today, I was a little bit concerned I had to do this in French. And that was going to be a major problem. But I'm also very pleased with the way he talked about it today, about his viewpoint as a counselor, as his viewpoint as a politician. You don't get that kind of openness a lot of times. So thank you for making those comments today. Also with Lorna, the provincial government is very proud of how much support we do provide to our municipalities. And you mentioned that twice. I didn't see Green Trip on your slide presentation. I will have to plug the Green Trip program that we do have. But again, also Guy said at the very start that I did not bring a checkbook. So, yeah. With this, I accepted this to come here over a year ago. And a lot of things have happened in Alberta within the last year. We went through a provincial leadership race, and we have a new Premier Alison Rickford. Then we just went through an election. So I can't say anything. We're still in the process of revamping how government looks, what government's going to be doing. And I think they are heading off in the right direction, at least for when we start looking at capital, how we deal with things. So some of the things that I'm going to say today really comes out of our budget situations that we announced earlier in the year. Also, I want to give you some context of what Alberta is, how large we are, and how complex we can be, and we are. So just to give you on the census side, 2011, the population was 3.6 million. It's an increase of 10.6 since the last one in 2006. And some of the comments that Lorna had, we have been going through boom and bust. We are expecting to see another growth program coming up. But again, that can be tempered by some of the things that are happening internationally. Of course, Alberta is not isolated from the world. That's one of the things we're looking at is how to access our markets worldwide nowadays. Just to give you ideas, Lorna gave some comments about their sewer systems and that. The province is actually responsible for a lot of things, but they through education and through school boards and some other agencies through Health and that. But to give you an idea, we have 1,500 schools, nearly 600,000 students from kindergarten up to grade 12. There's 26 publicly funded post-secondaries. That's University of Alberta, University of Calgary, University of Lethbridge. There's a whole host of them. We also have 400 hospitals, clinics, continuing care, and mental health facilities, and community health sites. There's 1,500 buildings that support the government itself. Those are just the building side and the vertical infrastructure we have. How do you deal with all that? Because it is now spread across the whole province. So how do we get there? Well, that's because transportation is the next one, and we use our provincial highway systems. Now, with that, we have 31,000 kilometers of provincial highways. We have two sets. One is the primary highways and a secondary highway system. Out of that, most of them are actually paved, 27,000 kilometers that are paved, and 2,300 kilometers of twinned highways. What is unbelievable is that there's over 4,000 bridge structures that we have to maintain. This is not even the ones that we're building new, because as we were saying before, we have been building ring roads around the two cities, Edmonton and Calgary, now for the last 5 years, 6 years, actually probably 12 years now. Those are extensive capital projects. They take a lot of capital and a lot of efforts to undertake. So when we came for Budget 212 that just came out, they were looking at the government's trying to look at how do we do things differently? How do we produce some things differently? So they came out with 3 priority areas. The first one is investing in families and communities. This is supporting healthy and strong families and communities in an investment in Alberta. That's an investment in Alberta and Alberta's future. This is some of the information that Lorna was talking about, how we actually invest in some of our communities. Securing Alberta's economic future. This is where we're trying to make strategic investments in both human capital and infrastructure to strengthen Alberta and to grow. The other one is actually advancing world-leading resource stewardship. We're looking at how we develop our natural resources responsibly and to protect our environment and grow our markets. We are looking at how do you grow less in the States, how do you actually access those markets in Asia, India, and possibly even Europe. So Alberta is looking at how to grow and keep on growing in this province. So with that, in the budget, we came up with a 3-year plan. That capital plan is $16.5 billion. That is a 1-year budget plus 2 years of planned budgeting. Now you got to remember, you have a 1-year budget that is set. The other 2 will be renewed, looked at the following next year. With that, though, a lot of these projects that we're working on actually carry through the 3 years or even up to 5 years. Some of these ring roads take 5 years to develop. One of the big things that came through the budget is what they're referring to as results-based budgeting. That is to ensure that the right services are provided in the most effective way possible. And that's looking at all our services, because we do have a lot of services. We have the education, we have health programs, we have municipalities. So they are far-reaching, and they are expensive. So what we're looking at doing is going into those programs, reviewing and ensuring that we have the right programs in place to manage to the long-term goals that are being created and looked at. This is some of the processes that are going on right now to deal with those long-term goals and see if we're actually meeting them with the services we have. We are looking at, it will take a 3-year period to do it, but also some of the difficulty is some of these programs actually cross ministries. So we're actually going to have cross-ministry people looking at it to determine the right services and the right goals that go along with that. The other piece that came out of the Budget 212 was we're going to review and update our 20-year capital plan. There was a capital plan done back in 2008. It was mostly focused, project-focused and highly detailed with projects net. Majority of those short-term and medium-term projects have been completed now, or they, at least they're under construction. So it's actually time for us to step back with the results-based budgeting to look at our long-term goals and long-term viewpoints where we want to go to. So actually, we're quite excited in trying to take that viewpoint and extension, because that's actually what the City of Edmonton has done, and we're going to go back to that kind of approaching to it. We're looking at it for it to be a higher level and a strategic plan for us to follow through. We want to see it consist of guiding principles and long-term goals. We do have a lot of information on our assets. So we're going to be looking at trying to get a balanced approach to capital asset investments and how that's going to be applied. We're looking at trying to provide a sound basis for decisions regarding the investment in and the management and disposal of government capital assets. Really, it's a life cycle analysis. When we look at projects now, we want those projects to be provided to capital planning on a life cycle basis. We want to know what the cost is going to be just to run that building, but also what's the long-term cost going to be for maintenance and renewals. What we also have to attach to that is what's the program cost that's going to be operated over that building. Is it reflected in the budgets? So it's a whole picture that you have to look at with these assets now. So we're looking at trying how to manage it again. Of course, we have to make the best possible use of the existing assets, and this is where we do have some concerns. We do have a deferred maintenance, just like every other government or municipality in Canada. We want to maximize value for money when investing in new assets. Make these decisions to retain or reinvest in assets that take into account consideration the needs of the current and the future generations. One of the things that we find now is that you may have an asset and it lived out its useful life or for that particular program. What do you do with it now? Can you repurpose it? Can you look at using that asset for another purpose now? That's some of the things that we want to start looking at, because if you remember at the very start of it, I've listed off 1,500 schools and another 1,500 government buildings. What do you do with them if that life cycle changes? Can you actually use it for something else? One of the things that hasn't really been talked about today is how do you actually deliver some of these assets? And if you deliver the assets, how can you actually maintain that asset over that period of time as well? So there are a few ways of delivering assets, and you can use your traditional design bid build policy, but how does that come back into relating it to your long-term maintenance and renewal programs? You have to look at that. Some projects, that's just the way it should be done. It's a good normal way of doing it. Design builds are actually efficient in trying to get that asset online faster, and it may actually be more economical to do that way. There has been some talk about public-private partnerships, and Alberta has probably 9 on the books right now for roads and schools, and we're doing one for a wastewater treatment plant that's under RFP right now. You have to look at different ways of actually providing that service. So under the P3 program, that actually takes care of that life cycle of that asset, or it might be a little bit less, because we've been actually looking at those ones. For the roads, it's 30 years contract. He has to maintain that building in a manner that we have specified for it. That's for the roads and schools. For the wastewater treatment plant we're working on, that may only be 10 years. So you look at the life cycle of that project, you look at the risk transfers that you can have for those projects. You can be looking at contracting out services. Transportation for our highways, they contract out maintenance programs for a 5, 7, and 10-year program for certain areas of the network. Those are different ways of doing things, and they've been doing it for 10 years, over 10 years. Also, I believe Edmonton still has some in-house designs, in-house maintenance works. You look at what works for you. Also, you look at what can I do to be better and how do I innovate things? That's what we're all here now looking at, trying to do. How do we do things better and more efficient? So with that, I think Guy and Lorna said everything. I just gave you high viewpoints of some other things. That's what we said. These are the experts now. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Neill. Before we open up the questions to the audience here, and we heard from Lorna and Neill, and I touched upon that, the whole issue of capital versus operations, and I think that it's part of managing the life cycle of our assets. But we have a tendency of looking at it from the cost perspective, and there are other dimensions. There are dimensions like the practices that are used. Once you acquire the asset, how you're going to be operating it and maintaining it. There are different ways of doing it, and there's some good ways and there's some bad ways. There's the whole issue of the financing, and this is why it's interesting to have this mix here, because we have a tendency to look at the cost and say, well, it's going to cost that much, and then go away and find the money for it. Well, yes, I agree, Lorna. It's not that simple. Financing, you have all kind of things. I usually have a tendency for new developments, for growth, not to worry about capital. Because capital, we get it paid through development charges. So I'm not worried about whether it's going to be 10 million or 20 million or 30 million at the acquisition level. But I'm worried about the minute that we acquire that asset, then we start to have to pay insurance, people to operate that asset, and so on. And this is where you start accumulating this. So having said that, in that particular context, and when we see that operations and maintenance are what are going to make our infrastructure sustainable, how do you both see infrastructure or asset management as a tool towards sustainable infrastructure?
That's the key behind this whole thing, actually. What you have to start looking at is where is that balance between your capital, your new capital, and your existing facilities. It is difficult. That's where some of your asset management frameworks will come in. This is where some of your programs or your inspections of what your buildings and what their conditions are in, so you can actually make some good decision as to where I'm going to put my money. This is one of the bigger questions. How do you set up that envelope of funding that can drive into new assets, and how much support you can actually give to your maintenance operations? And that is a very difficult question, and Lorna, I think you've been saying it. It's difficult. How do you make that split and that allocations to it when you have so much pressures to continue with some growth? This is probably where some of the issues that Alberta has seen with the boom and bust. We grow so fast, we have to get new infrastructure. And then it slows down so fast that income's not coming in anymore. So you have to come up with a fiscal policy of how do you level out that boom and bust situation that we occur in here. And that's a very difficult question. We are looking at a new fiscal framework at the government, and hopefully that's going to give us some of that direction. We do want to see, how much money do you actually allocate to maintenance and renewals. There's been some studies on it, and we haven't really found that balance yet. But it is a very important question that we're going to have to answer soon.
Lorna?
Well, I think that for me, what asset management is about, why it's so important, is it's about taking a proactive approach as opposed to a reactive approach. And that the first thing that you have to look at with the assets that you have is, do you need to sustain them? So in other words, do they continue to support the services and programs that you're either responsible for providing or that you choose to continue to provide. And then if you take that longer term approach, and if you actually look at managing your assets, for me, from a financial perspective, I think that sometimes accountants, we make arbitrary distinction between what's a capital expense, what's an operating expense. For me, it's just about spending the right amount of money at the right time, so that you're actually spending less in terms of that entire life cycle of the least amount that you can possibly spend. So if you look at it long term and you understand, if you have good engineers, and you understand where's the optimum time to actually put some resources into your infrastructure, then it would be foolish not to do it on that basis. So it's about making sure that you have an investment that lasts for a long time. And this is where I actually do agree with a comment that Guy made earlier on. It's about common sense. It's about what do you do if you're just looking at your own house. And you know that if you don't actually maintain your own house well enough, that you're going to get hit with probably even a bigger bill at the end of the day than if you actually do it in a proactive way along the way. So I think it takes a lot of different disciplines. It's sort of like a multidisciplinary approach to say, do we still need this? Does it still support our programs? Is it an asset that we want to maintain? Is it an asset that we need to be sustainable? If the answers to all those questions are yes, then what's the least amount of cost that I can put into doing that over time? And that then becomes a question of when you spend the money and how much you have to spend.
Thanks, and again, just what I have heard from both of you is this multidiscipline aspect of our business, of managing the assets, that engineers have a role to play, that there are a number of other disciplines that can help and that are essential at the table. So what I'm going to do now is I have a whole bunch of questions, but they don't want to hear them because they already know those. And so let's open it to the audience here. And if anybody has some questions, either to the group or to a particular person, then go ahead. Yes, sir.
I have a quick question on collaboration. We heard in the keynote speech this morning that collaboration seems to be the name of the game in this global world. And I heard Lorna's presentation about challenges and financing and operating the infrastructure. And I was just wondering if we have a collaboration in the planning, especially city of Edmonton, with other cities, for example, Calgary is very close, and other cities and province and even country, how others are managing these assets. For example, how they finance in terms of capital and operations. Do you collaborate with others, and what are the lessons learned? I heard a lot of challenges and how others are dealing with those challenges and how you learn from those.
So I think that, yes, we actually do collaborate. I think that one of the things that we've learned a hard lesson about is that in a regional perspective, because we're a big city in the midst of a number of smaller municipalities, and that it's essential for us to collaborate with those other municipalities so as to not duplicate infrastructure. Because if we're just worried about Edmonton and Edmonton's taxpayers, we may not be actually doing the best that we can for the region and the region's taxpayers, or for the province and the province's taxpayers. Because even though we talk about those as if they're different people, it's really all the same person that's paying the bill. That's you and me, and so it's about, is collaboration actually going to add value? And so from my perspective, the answer to that is yes, in terms of the actual distribution of the infrastructure and how you use it. But more than that, it's about not reinventing the wheel. It's about understanding where there's good practices and where you can build on those good practices. And so even on a global perspective, maybe what I could give you a sense of is that So I actually, we did a little bit of restructuring in the city of Edmonton, and I gained 2 new portfolios. As of Monday, I'm now responsible for the 2 utilities, which is waste management and drainage services. And our waste management services are undoubtedly world-class. And so one of the privileges that I have now being part of that is I'm going to go to China in 2 weeks' time, and we're actually looking at sharing the integrated approach that Edmonton, Alberta takes to the management of waste to Beijing. And Beijing is very interested in acquiring some of that expertise. So I think that we collaborate not only on a regional and provincial level, but that we do that on an international level as well. And that's to the benefit of all of us.
Just to add on what Lorna's saying, when we're looking at our 20-year strategic capital plan, we have to actually sit down with the municipalities and find out what they're doing, because some of the things they do will affect the province as to funding levels going through schools and hospital facilities, where they would actually be relocated, or the need to have them located. Also, some of the information that we're doing with Green Trip, or our Green Trip program, was based on regional systems and not city issues. It was actually based on regional. So the transportation for that was Capital Region, Calgary Region, and all other areas of Alberta. There are pan-Canadian meetings that we have with other provinces as to discuss the same issues that we're discussing here, to understand what they're doing, where their issues are, and how they're overcoming those. We're finding that the other provinces actually want to have more of a discussion on things, but we have to have the right discussions on the right things.
Just maybe to add, I agree 100% with what both have said. I think that we have to look at the various levels of collaboration that they can be. There can be this technical collaboration, and through fora like this one and other professional organizations. We certainly are a lower tier municipality, so we're within a county. And there's no way that we can operate without collaborating with the county. They're the ones that hold our official plan for our rural areas. So we are a neighbor to the city of Ottawa, so that we have to collaborate with them. Our transit system, public transit system, we have a very small public transit system, but we are collaborating so that our pass holders can use the Ottawa public transit at a reasonable fee as well. And it's a question of sharing. I think that what Lorna was saying, that sharing the knowledge that has been created in Edmonton through the solid waste initiatives and the research that we have a research center, I think, as well. And I think that yes, it's happening. It's probably not advertised as much as it should be, but it's happening. And those that don't do it remain with less than optimal practices. Go ahead.
Just bring that down to a very small level. And that is for our P3s, which are design, builds, finance, and operating. Just on one small point, when we started looking at the risk transfers and everything in that one, we found, and you can probably find in most things, when you have a designer and a contractor actually sit down in the same room, they actually come up with better ideas of actually how to build it, because they're actually discussing things with the contractor, saying, this is what I have, this is how I do it. Can you design something around that? That's something that we noticed, and the biggest thing we noticed was bring an operator into that picture. He'll come in and say, you're going to do what? Actually, if you do this, I can save you on your operating costs. And actually, you may end up paying a little bit more up front, but you're actually save more money in the back end of this thing, and how you actually end up doing some renewals. So it's that kind of collaboration and actually getting some people in the room to discuss the whole thing. Then you throw in the financing guy, well, that's a whole new game. But again, he actually will bring another perspective and do some of that analysis for him.
Yeah.
So actually, it's that smaller piece that you can actually then expand it to the wider picture and say, where else can I take this? How else can I apply that kind of thinking to it? Where can I get the creativity and innovations of it?
Okay, thank you. I had a question. Yes. Well, I'll go to Reg 1 and then 2 for the other. Go ahead, Reg.
Question for Lorna and for Neill. Lorna, the
So I think that what I'd really like to see us do is to build on the expertise and the research that we've currently done, and take this planning to the next level, which is to say that we would actually not just be able to apply this kind of approach to the renewal of infrastructure, but also to the growth of infrastructure. Right now, we're looking really hard at the traditional developer-city relationship and who gets to dictate to whom as to how things get built. And we have in the past had a tendency to say to those developers, because they pay the upfront costs, that we haven't really challenged them as much as we might, realizing that we're going to inherit those contributed assets and that we're going to be responsible for them going forward. And so it's about efficiency in new growth as well as in taking care of the renewal. And so I think that we're making great strides with respect to that. And also because Edmonton in the region is looking at our footprint. We are a very large municipality geographically, and we have actually adopted within the region a growth management plan that has set certain density targets for the municipalities within the region. And so we're trying to look at, because what we've analyzed mostly on the growth side is the greenfield development. We're now actually trying to take that from an infrastructure perspective in terms of infill. And so if we actually are looking at revitalizing neighborhoods, what's the cost and what's the long-term payoff? Because quite frankly, in terms of the cost, the initial cost, it's quite often more expensive to do the revitalization and the infill than it is to allow for the greenfield development. But that's not the kind of city that we envision ourselves to be later on. One of the things that really I can speak to from the other side of the fence, from being a city manager in one of those smaller municipalities that surrounded Edmonton, is that Edmonton's very good at sharing expertise and knowledge. And so I would suggest to you that what I would also like to see is us be able to develop some approaches that don't require the same kind of technical expertise to sustain as we currently have in the city of Edmonton, because as Guy said, they don't even have an engineer yet. And so if you actually are looking at perpetuating those practices across Alberta, then it becomes, how do you give tools to smaller municipalities that perhaps don't have, in fact not perhaps, don't have the expertise that we're very fortunate to have at the City of Edmonton. So I think that that's sort of the next 5 to 10 years for us.
And if I'm smart, I'll keep my mouth shut.
Well, then I'll take the opportunity to say something. No, and thanks, Rach, for that question, because I'm really looking forward for the results that are going to be coming up in the 5 to 10 years from Edmonton, because, yes, I agree, Edmonton has been very generous with sharing the information. I'm just going to go back to your relationship that you mentioned with developers, especially for growth, and the slide that I showed you about the deferred maintenance, it happened to be a slide that I extracted from a presentation that I did to council. Now, the first time I asked the mayor, I said, well, I want to make a presentation on new growth to council, and he looked at me and said, well, councillors don't make presentations to council. And I said, get used to it. I have done two in the last 18 months. But out of that presentation came out a discussion with the developers, because you can imagine the developers reacting to, say, to a councillor saying growth is not sustainable. Okay, that was the conclusion of my presentation. So they went up in arms. We have now created a working group between the local construction agency and our infrastructure and buildings committee, and we're starting to have discussions about how we can improve our own city practices to be able to have long-term sustainability of the infrastructure, but also how can they build the new infrastructure better so that it will last longer. So we're in discussions about having better engineering standards about the new infrastructure that they're going to transfer to us, but also the city making commitments to maintain that infrastructure so it lasts that long. So again, that relationship there is extremely important. Ian, you were number 2.
Yeah, just a comment, much of the question. There was one of the slides about different procurement models, P3, insource, outsource. And some work we've been doing with the Dual Bank performance-based contracting, what we've actually come to realise is the whole benefit, or a lot of the benefit of outsourcing in contract and maintenance was actually drive a real paradigm shift in asset management. Because to do it well, you have to know what you've got. You have to go through the thinking process of what are the risks, what is it that I'm wanting to carry, what do I want to put out, what are the service standards. And I've encouraged a lot of municipalities that are really struggling around the concept of affordability, not necessarily have to contract out, go through the thought process of, if I was going to put this out on the market, what would I actually want to pay for? Because what you often find is stuff you do yourself, you'll never be willing to pay someone else to do it for you. And it's a pretty good way to get a feel around the levels of service. Because I think in many cases you can actually rationalise a lot of the costs. And I'm sure we've sort of said, well, probably 80% of the benefits of going out to the market was actually achieved before you've actually gone to the market. You know, it's just what sort of role, I guess, in a way, the Alberta government gives in trying to help municipalities think through the process, whether or not they go through the process, but to think through the process as to what, I guess, the benefits of different procurement models might be in driving the asset management.
And thank you, that's not a planted question. You said the right things here. We actually go through, when we do a P3, we actually do a business case on it. We look at some of the risk transfers and the life cycle of that project. And sometimes it doesn't work. It's not a good project. So what I'm trying to teach some of our people inside is if you go through that process of analyzing your project for a full life cycle, you start understanding the project and your clarity as to what you want and what you need. And if you can transfer that to other portions of your business, and that same detailed discussions and reviews, it will actually help you, and it'll be your regular project. It will be a regular traditional design, bid, build, but you will have a better understanding of how to do that project. There was a project for one of the cities that we were in discussions with of how they were doing it. It never came out as a P3. So at the end of when it didn't go through as a P3, there was reasons for it. I asked them, what did you learn out of it? And they came back and said, we learned how to look at a project in a life cycle manner and how to actually start looking at what risks are associated with that project on a life cycle analysis and what it actually takes to finance and actually see a project through from the start to the end. And then if you can start that process looking at all your programs and assets, it goes a long way.
Okay, thank you. Lorna,
I hope that answered your question.
anything you wanted to add to that? Or
No, I think
Okay.
that's a great answer.
Gordon, and after that, Bill.
Just wanted to follow on in the comment there that as to how do we get all communities, I guess all levels of government and all municipalities fully embracing, I guess, the concepts of asset management. And I guess one of the comments I would make or questions I'd have is that kind of how far along, how many communities in, I think we've got, 60 counties in Alberta, and I don't know how many urban municipalities, but of those, how
tell you the truth, I think I would probably say very few. I think the larger cities would have something in place, and I'll hold up the City of Edmonton as a glowing result. I've been on some pan-Canadian meetings concerning infrastructure, and they always come back to Edmonton of how they do it. How you get there, it has to be some more open discussions with municipalities on funding. Some of the smaller municipalities, it is going to be tough for them because they don't have that funding levels to start looking at. Carrot or stick, that's always a good question how to do it. If you hold back funding, they're not going to gain anything. If you come back and say, can you show me a plan, it might help. I'd rather do some carrots than a stick. It's hard to get some good results if you're using a stick all the time. But it's going to be a lot more open communications with the municipalities and the province. And some of that discussions will be going on through municipal affairs.
So I agree with the carrot approach, but it's not so much from a funding perspective, it's from an understanding perspective. I think that where we have our biggest challenge is not in terms of a lack of willingness, it's in a lack of know-how. It's in a lack of ability inherent in the municipality itself to actually take the steps forward that need to be taken. And it's about how do we actually share in a practical way how they can go about becoming better asset managers, and getting them to understand that it's not magic, that it is pretty much common sense, that it is practical application, and it's about developing some tools that are not expensive, that can actually lead them through asking the right questions about their current state and their future needs, so that they can actually do some planning. Because all we're really talking about with asset management, it's just a kind of planning, right? And so if you don't actually know how to do it, it becomes insurmountable. And so I think that part of the carrot piece has to be that education piece. And I think that the province of Alberta has a role to play in that regard, but I also think that Edmonton and Calgary have a role to play in that regard. So that would be an interesting exploration to pursue.
Gordon, a short follow-up, please.
My comment there, I would fully endorse that. And I'm from Saskatchewan, and we're a bit unique there in that we've got 767 municipal entities, so we haven't done the amalgamation thing yet. So we've got 296 rural municipalities. But the experience we've had in the last 2 or 3 years, it started with the PS 3150 thing, is that when you actually start talking around the table and talk about managing on a life cycle basis, the light goes on. And like, it isn't that, most of the folks in rural Saskatchewan are farmers, right? So they're already managing things on a life cycle basis in their own life. And so it doesn't take very long for them to catch on and say, yeah, well, let's do it. And I guess the other thing is that I think a very big part of the benefit, it's the old 90-20 or 90-10 rule again. You get 90% of the benefits with 10% of the effort if you can ask the right questions. And that if you start managing proactively, as you suggested, and thinking about it on a life cycle basis, with 10% of the effort, you get 90% of the benefits. And I think that's the challenge, is how do we engage everybody, all stakeholders, so that we can begin to talk about proactive life cycle management.
Thank you, Gordon. And I'll have I have a comment which is politically correct in this case, which I like the carrot on the stick, approach. And what we've seen in Ontario about 2 weeks ago, I was at a meeting of mayors and wardens in Eastern Ontario, meeting with 3 ministers, and 4 ministries represented by 3 ministers. So agriculture, infrastructure, transport, and municipal affairs. And I could count at least in each of the speeches made by those 3 ministers representing 4 ministries, twice the word asset management in their speeches. So I think that there is a role to play at both levels, and I think that it is going to have to be a carrot and stick, balance in the approaches. We had Bill, and
Thank you. I want to key off with something that Neill said earlier, which was about getting the participants involved in projects, the operators, builders, the constructors, and everything else. Up in the States, one of the things we've struggled with is doing just that. And there's been a number of great examples when a number of projects come together and the teams work together and try to break down these barriers. But it's more the exception than the rule. Did I pick up from you that Canada's doing things differently? Is there a way to get to do, then we're going to export all our lawyers to you guys so we can mess up you and
Neill?
Well, that, because actually some of the, it was through the P3. We said we're going to do these projects by the P3. We did all the analysis and we set it up, we were going through it. With that, because we have four of those underway, or I think we just signed the 5th contract, the contractors and designers and the operators are actually the same people who do our regular work now, the traditional design bid builds. And I think they're actually now still considering talking to each other and the operators. The operators have seen some of the things that we've done in the P3s, and they go, oh, even transportation, and you say, oh, that's how you're doing some of the operations? We want to import that into our regular work now. So it is a matter of trying to break down those barriers. We have done the same things for some schools. We have 3 right now, 2 operation, 1 operational, 1 going in operation, 1 under construction. We found that when they started talking again, they found new ways of doing a roof on the schools. 30-year roof. No one's ever done those things at the cost that they're going to go to them. So it's some of that work now that we are seeing filtering out into the traditional world. It is tough. We had a lot of feedback saying, don't do it this way, we don't want to do it. But again, if there's that group that was involved in it, they've actually gone back and expanded some of their business techniques to bring in those concepts. This is why it goes right back again, trying with the cities and that, and for even internal government, to go through the process of analyzing a project. All the facets, all the life cycle of it. And you actually find people start looking and questioning, why are we doing it? Well, we did it that way for the last 20 years. Well, maybe it's wrong. Let's question things. Let's challenge things.
Thank you. We had the gentleman there.
I guess I'll ask a question. All 3 of you are talking about life cycle cost, asset management, and the use term of level service and physical targets and that kind of thing. In reality, we all have different type of facility. Like for example, you have a material road, you have a local road, and those kind of things. How do you really set that physical target on level service? Is that a purely engineering exercise, or it has to be some kind of community acceptability consultation and things like that to be part of that process?
Lorna, you want to
So
start?
that one's really challenging. So we, of course, do have engineering standards on certain things. What we try and do is understand what a variety of impacts will actually be. One of the exercises that the city is now embarked upon is an exercise at the neighborhood development level, whereby we actually work with developers to a greater extent than we ever have before to talk about what it is that we're trying to achieve in the neighborhood, not just for them to have a saleable product, but for us to have a good neighborhood moving forward. And so we've I mean, we've done this to a certain extent in the past, but we've pulled it up to a new level so that we can actually have some dialogue with them to say, okay, but why are we doing it that way? And we've opened it up across the city in terms of the departments. So say, for example, if they come to us and they say we have this much more efficient road layout, and it's going to cost us less, and it's going to achieve these things that you've asked for, and we send that through to roads operations, and they say, yeah, where are we going to put the snow? You know, so it becomes about then understanding that that there's different ways of measuring efficiency, and that if we get the most efficient road layout that actually costs the developers less, means that the housing is more affordable, but that our current $45 million snow removal budget doubles in, you know, then it's maybe not the best way to approach things. So we are looking at how we can actually measure those things to a greater degree.
Neill?
What we're also looking at, you know, you were saying conditions. There are programs, there are assessment tools for those condition assessments. But also you have to look at the utilization of the facility you're dealing with, also the functionality of that facility as well when you start evaluating these. One of the bigger questions that we have that we try to tackle is how do you compare a road to a hospital, to a school? When you start doing some of the asset management and planning of the direction you want to go into. So those are bigger questions, and they're difficult. There's ways of getting around it, but they are different questions you want to ask.
Just to complement a little bit again, that you know, first we look at the levels of service with different, you know, two different types. Those that are mandated, and those that the provincial government tells us that you have to fulfill these type of level of service with whatever service you're providing. So, for example, for police, for fire, we have standards. That's the level of service, reaction times, and so on. And we have no choice. We have to find the money to fulfill those levels of service. Although we're not obligated sometimes to provide the service, once we decide to do it, then we have to abide by those standards. The other ones, which are the more fuzzy, and this is where it gets fun to be at council, are those community objectives. You know, and there has been a creep in terms of the level of service, that expectations from the population. And just to give you an example, we started, by the way, we don't have established levels of service for a lot of, for many of our services. So it becomes a, you know, we pull the blanket, or we trade. And this is not the best way of managing your infrastructure, I agree. But we had, in the spring last year at budget time, we decided to create a reserve fund for roads. And with that reserve fund, we decided that we're going to do for a road management plan, and we're going to establish level of service criteria that we're going to be abiding by once we have the priority list to invest. So remove the politics out of the decision-making process, which roads needs to be done. Council unanimously approved it. We went through. We are now, Monday, when I come back to council, we are approving the prioritization criteria for our roads. Now, it was interesting because the past Monday we had one of our other council meetings, and we told council, and I told council, Monday we are approving the prioritization criteria. And then some councillors now are starting to say, well, are we going to see the list of priorities before we approve the priority criteria? And I said, no, you're not going to see it. And I said, oh, well, it's not fair. I said, exactly, it is fair. That's what, so you know, we have to go through this process of establishing the levels of service before decision makers see where the investment is going to be taking place. And that's tough. That's tough. We have one more question. I think this gentleman here.
Is the question is, you presented a lot about asset management and so forth. Now, if there are already explicitly, do you explicitly account for that, or do you assume the designers, engineers, or whoever have implicitly accounted for that, and then you walk in and say, how can we?
So from a City of Edmonton perspective, we don't assume, and we take guidance from, we approach things from what I'm going to call a quadruple bottom line perspective. And the piece that we add in there is the finance piece. So it's your economic, your environment, your social, cultural, and your financial perspective. And so when we're looking at things, and let's just take the environment for instance, we're actually doing work on modeling an environmental overlay for new growth so that we can actually understand what the impacts are for the city in terms of carbon emissions with respect to new growth. And I'm not saying to you that at this point in time that that information or that awareness is actually impacting to a great degree the way we make decisions, but we are starting to do it. And so we're on an evolutionary journey in terms of using those different lenses. Certainly on the social cultural side, I would suggest to you that we have quite a long history of making decisions based on what's good for livability, because that's what it amounts to in terms of what's good for livability. But we did just implement a program here not that long ago, a 10-year program, $150 million, that's about simply revitalizing some neighborhoods from a community infrastructure perspective as opposed to what I'm going to call a major or core infrastructure perspective. So yes, we are, but it's about where we haven't captured the magic formula is in the weighing of those priorities. And what we're actually landing on, that it's not our job to do that. Guy actually has the tough job. And so if we put the information to council in the right way so that they actually understand what are the benefits and the challenges and the impacts of the decisions that they make. We have 13 people here in Edmonton that speak for 800,000 people. They have a very hard job, and in my humble opinion, they do it very, very well. And what they get to do then is to weigh those competing priorities. And I would suggest to you that this council that we have now and the past council have done a very good job of balancing that stuff. If you are familiar with the Edmonton region at all and have followed the media, we have a 1% for art program, say, for example, and we have this sculpture that sits beside the Quesnel Bridge rehabilitation that's called the Talus Dome, and it's created so much controversy about whether or not that's an appropriate way for a city to spend $600,000. But you know what? It's all part of what makes Edmonton livable. And I'm really glad that I don't have the job of actually determining that balance. I think those 13 people do a great job, but it's not a job I would want.
Neill?
With that,
I'll comment about that later.
I'm going to agree with pretty well everything Lorna said. It's very, and I'm going to say council has a difficult job, but actually the government employees have a bigger difficult job trying to actually put the information together in a logical framework and a defendable framework and in a manner that's you can put in front of council to say, yes, I have all the information, the correct information, where I can make a decision. So actually, I'm going to say it's actually your guys are working in the background doing all that work. They should be applauded as well because they have to come up with that information for council and make these tough decisions. And it's not easy to come up with all that information.
No, it's not.
I can say councillors can be quite demanding. And I am one of them. And I have told staff that whatever they send me, I will read. So be careful about what they send me. Because there are some councillors in the past that, didn't pay attention to what was given to them. And now we have a new council, and there are a lot of councillors that read what is provided to them and analyze it in a way that it was not done before. So what I have seen in terms of all these decision-making processes is that the information that we are provided has changed. You know, the first couple of council meetings in terms of sustainability, I wanted to know, okay, I would ask the question, what is, you know, what are the operation and maintenance costs over the life cycle of the asset that we're supposed to be getting? And you know, Director of Public Works and Finance, they looked at me like, it's, you know, now it is in the reports. So you know, it's an evolution. We are at the end of our panel, so I really want to thank Neill and Lorna for being here. It's been a great discussion. Hopefully, you know, you got most of your answers answered and your questions answered. And if not, then you can try to track us down. But thank you very much, everybody, and thank our speakers.